Thank you, everyone, and welcome back. Our second session, we will now talk about the Adirondack Road Salt Task Force. This was a discussion that we had last year, and there was plenty of interest because this was a task force that was set up through some legislation back in 2020, and it was named the Randy Preston Road Salt Reduction Act. Randy, the late Randy Preston, was a good friend of many of ours in the room. Supervisor Wilmington was engaged with many of us on the discussions regarding road salt and how we could reduce that. Sometimes we were not on the same side of an issue, but on this one we were, and Randy was a true warrior and truly believed that we could do better to protect our roads, our communities, as well as our environment. And this, I remember sitting through many meetings with the department. He had the ear of Commissioner Hajos, and through meetings that we had with them in our Adirondack Road Salt Working Group, also with Dr. Dan Kelting, with Brittany Christensen, Lee Keat, and others, were able to meet as well with DOT and start to partner and collaborate on these issues. And through that legislation, the task force was started. Got off to a late start. There was a change in administrations, but happily, I think it was 4 weeks ago today, that report was issued. And we now have recommendations to move forward. And we are pleased today to have representatives from the two co-chairs, Commissioner Basil Hajos from Department of Environmental Conservation, as well as Commissioner Dominguez from DOT. First, we will hear from Sean Mahar, who really kind of herded the cats, I think, when we were all on the videos and getting together. I was actually a late appointee to the task force. I was fortunate, I guess. I missed a lot of the work and just got my name put in the report, so that was pretty good. And everyone else did the work, but we're pleased to have Sean here. Sean is the Executive Deputy Commissioner of the New York State DEC, a position which she's held since 2021 and has been with the department since 2015. Before that, he was a Director of Government Relations with Audubon, New York, as well as an adjunct professor with Siena College, teaching environmental policy and management. And he was also recognized as a Conservationist of the Year by the Wildlife Society back in 2012. So please welcome Executive Deputy Commissioner Mahar.
Not used to walk-up music giving presentations. I didn't know if I should dance or take this as seriously as this issue is, but thank you, Chris, and thank you for having us. And on behalf of Commissioner Hajos, it's great to be here with you today. And I want to start off with some important facts, and that is, one, the commissioner's attendance is not indicative of how an agency prioritizes an issue. Our schedules are always in flux. We have a lot of issues going on. Our forest rangers were on the front lines of the search that was going on yesterday in the Capital Region, and there are a lot of different things that are going on always. The commissioner did want to be here today, but he sent me because he couldn't, and he was very disappointed that his schedule wouldn't allow him to be here because he is very invested in this, and we are prioritizing this. And you should know that we are a team at DEC, and we work together to really advance the solutions to the major issues that we're facing of our time. And especially when it comes to water quality, nothing is more important than our ability to address water quality impairments. And that starts with what we're putting in our water. And that starts here with salt on this topic today. And, you know, one important, I think, thing I want to leave you with too is that this report is important. This report is important to the state. We invested a lot of time, energy, and expertise in making it and working with the task force to make it happen. And any inference that this is not prioritized by the state is just simply false. And I want you to know that we are committed to reviewing this report, looking at the recommendations, implementing those that we can, and working collectively together with you all to advance the great work that was in this task force report. And we are prioritizing it, and I just want to make that abundantly clear. And really what we're aiming to do is reducing road salt. And that is really the name of the game and the business that we're in, and why I'm here today, and why we're going to listen to you all and continue to work with you all to make that happen. But it's important, as the task force report points out, that balance is the key. And as we learned through the task force process, and I learned a lot, I think as Chris mentioned, on task force management and how to bring together very passionate people collectively to develop a report and put it into paper and now put it into practice. And, we learned a lot about balance, because we do have the need to protect water quality and reduce road salt contributions in the environment, but we do have to balance the need to keep people safe and the driving public safe. And when I talk about schedules, we spend a lot of time on the road at DEC, going to different events, going to different places, and we see the importance of needing safe and accessible roadways. But we also see what happens in the practices there that can be improved. And rest assured, Commissioner Hajos is always calling DOT when he sees something on his travels around the state. We're asking questions. Why are you doing it this way? Or how does this work like this? Or couldn't you do it like this? And that's the type of collaborative governance that we really bring to how we operate as an agency overall, and how we work with our colleagues to make things happen on the ground. And that's really what you're going to see as we work and move into taking the recommendations of the task force and really start putting them into practice. And we are excited. We are excited to be getting to work, to continue this conversation, and really start getting the pilots on the ground underway, and really start seeing the seeing the progress that we're going to collectively make. And I think that's some of the key takeaways that I took away from the task force work overall, and that is the need for continued collaboration. This is a loaded issue. There are a lot of opinions. There is a lot of passion that people bring to this issue overall, and the more that we can work collaboratively together and collectively together, we can actually make real change happen. And that's really what we want to see, and we want to continue that collaborative dialogue overall. And communication is going to be critical. That's communication with each other, but communication outward, and really education. We have a lot of education to do of everyday New Yorkers. I think, as the report pointed out, we need to explain to them how and why we manage the roads, how and why their expectations have to change a little bit, and how and why they need to drive safely. And that is one of the key messages that we need to convey to the driving public. We are doing our best as practitioners and transportation managers to keep those roads safe, but in our telecommuting day and age, maybe stay off the roads a little bit longer. Give our crews time to maintain them properly. Don't feel the need to rush in the car and drive 65 miles an hour on a snow-covered road. You are not doing a service to your fellow New Yorkers that way. And you're necessitating this notion that the road should be black always. And what we learned through the task force is we need to really effectively communicate to the driving public. And those are some of the things that we're going to work on with each and every one of you as we look to really, again, implement the recommendations here to reduce that amount of salt that we're using and get creative with how we're maintaining our roads overall. And again, that balance is going to be critical, and that's why we need to continue to work together. So I really thank the task force members. It was a great experience to work with such knowledgeable and passionate individuals from all walks of life here in the Adirondacks and across the state, and see them come together and really develop this important task force report that we have. And it was really great to work with our colleagues at DOT to make that happen. And I know Rob is going to talk, and I don't want to steal his thunder about how DOT is going to be implementing this. But here at DEC, we've obviously are committed and are going to continue a lot of the work that we're doing and grow and expand that. And first thing is monitoring. We have a great, robust monitoring network across the state. We're going to continue the surface and groundwater monitoring to really keep building that data set, as that's an important tool that we need as managers and regulators to make sure we've got the science and the data to tell us where we need to target and pinpoint our actions. I know funding is a big issue, and funding is going to maintain and continue to be a priority. We are, continuing to work with the Water Quality Improvement Program within the Clean Water Infrastructure Act. We're going to look at the Environmental Protection Fund to see what other funding sources we can bring, but we're going to continue to provide grants to enclose municipal road salt storage piles. we need to start not just in how we spread our salt on the roads, but where we store it. And the storage needs to, be thought about in its impacts on water quality. So we're going to continue to advance that program, and we anticipate announcing another similar award from what we did last year to enclose road salt storage piles across the state and help communities do that. And then we're going to use our regulatory and permitting authority to look at how we are permitting bulk salt storage areas and facilities and requiring individual speedies permits and getting as creative we can with our permitting authority here in the state. And lastly, obviously, and I know Rob will talk about this more, but pilots. We're going to continue to work with DOT, continue to work with our local government partners, really to advance those pilot studies and really find out what that winning combination is going to be or suite of combinations are going to be to drive down road salt use and really work to reduce those water quality impacts. And that's something where our sleeves are rolled up. We're going to continue to make that happen, and this is a priority. So I hope that I've conveyed that enough. This is a priority for the state. We are not going anywhere. We're going to continue to work with you all in this room and partners across the state to really make this happen, because we recognize the impacts that road salt is having and the need to make operational changes and achieve that balance. And that's where our sleeves are rolled up, and that's what we're going to do. And that's why I'm glad AJ Smith is here today and going to sit on the panel for DEC, because he's one of the sharpest minds in the agency when it comes to water quality and this issue in particular. And I could not have done this task force without AJ. So again, Commissioner Segos was very apologetic that he couldn't be here, but again, his absence does not in any way indicate that this is being deprioritized as an agency, and we are looking forward to working with you all to make that happen. So I'll introduce my colleague, Rob from DOT. Rob Fitch, if you'd like to come up.
Very well stated, Sean. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rob Fitch. I'm the Director of Transportation Maintenance for the New York State Department of Transportation. And I'm happy to be here this morning representing Commissioner Dominguez, who, along with Commissioner Segos, was co-chair for the Adirondack Road Salt Reduction Task Force. As we all know, the Road Salt Reduction Task Force produced its final report, which was submitted on September 5th, as Chris had mentioned, which fulfilled its obligations under the legislation. Commissioner Dominguez would like to thank all of the task force members for their diligent work throughout this important collaborative process to produce the final report. And we're all looking forward to this morning's conversation with the task force members. Maintaining the balance between providing a safe highway system while protecting the environment is a critical goal for all snow and ice practitioners. New York State DOT has a legal obligation to provide for a safe highway system, and while we take this responsibility very seriously, we also pride ourselves on being good stewards of the environment. As Mike from the town of Peru mentioned, he mentioned continuous improvement. DOT also realizes that continuous improvement is critical for any responsible practitioner, and DOT intends to use the momentum that we've gained through the task force and the report to build upon our existing best practices and to further refine our snow and ice program. All of the recommendations in the task force report are being evaluated and they're being considered as DOT preparations continue for the upcoming winter season. Our existing pilots that have been underway for the last few years, they will be continued, which are Route 9N in Warren County, Route 73 and 86 in Essex County, and Route 5S in Herkimer County. We're also currently evaluating other locations within the Adirondack Park to implement some new salt reduction pilots, and we intend to have those in place prior to the beginning of the upcoming snow and ice season. Now, in addition to these pilots which work on our field practices, DOT is also exploring reviewing diverse data sets and analytics to monitor and evaluate our road salt usage. We believe that a more refined analysis is going to allow us to better manage and optimize our salt use. And as required by the legislation, a detailed evaluation of all of our pilot programs, everything we've learned, will be delivered to the state legislature in August of 2024, August of next year. And lastly, I want to point out, and Phil mentioned this earlier, that his goal is to share these best practices across North America. Well, certainly our goal is to share the things that we learn in Adirondack Park all across the state and also across the country. Best practices that are validated by our pilots, we're rolling out statewide. We don't need to keep these secrets here in the Adirondack Park. We want everyone to benefit from that. So we will be rolling out these best practices statewide as we can. And we also share our best practices with some national organizations, just to continue the conversation nationwide so that everybody can learn from this. Links to the final report, the task force report, they're on the DOT website. And we also have an email that's been set up so anyone can submit questions or comments. Chris, I think you have that information already, but I will make sure it's available to you so it can be posted so others can get access to it. So again, Commissioner Dominguez, she's sorry she could not be here, but she is very proud to have been part of the task force. DOT is very proud to have been part of the task force and the final report. And we look forward to this morning's panel discussion. Chris?
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Sean. Really appreciate the words and recognition of this issue and look forward to working with you moving forward on this important report. So to carry this discussion out, we invited members of the task force, and we wanted to select members that actually had kind of focused points. We really wanted to have somebody that would represent local government, and we wanted to have Delaney, present from the Adirondack Local Government Review Board. We wanted someone to focus on operations. We invited Kevin Hajos from Warren County DPW, somebody on sustainability, so we were going to bring Phill Sexton back up. And on the scientific side, we were going to ask Dr. A.J. Smith with New York State DEC to come up as well. So if they could please come up to the chairs. And the way we will work this is that we will now, I have some questions as well. We will ask each of them to introduce themselves, describe their background or their connection, with the park, and discuss what their involvement with the task force was. And then we will also field questions from the audience as well as online. And if there are any moments of silence, I've got a cheat sheet here with me. So I guess I'll start with you right here, Phill.
Oh, I would have gotten set.
You would have sat over there.
Well, I think my involvement with the task force really is a bit more broader scope. So you've heard a lot of our story already, but we've been doing this in a lot of different places. In a lot of ways, I'm representing the practitioner on the private side of the industry. I've been a private snow and ice contractor for over 30 years, in addition to all these other weird things that I do. As far as my involvement in the Adirondack Park, at a personal level, I've been, this has sort of been my happy place, right? The park has been my happy place since I was a child. So I used to call the park more so the sort of southwestern end, particularly Hamilton County, that area, and then been hanging out in the peaks for a long time, swimming a lot of these lakes, competing Ironmans, that whole thing up in Lake Placid, and so it's been a fun ride for me. As far as, I think just our work here is really where my passion led us to, and so we've just had the pleasure of working with lots of different towns, villages, counties, so it's been an interesting collaboration that I think, as we talked about earlier, what we're doing here in Lake George has really kind of scaled park-wide, and I think to Rob's point, I think, this goes statewide, really. I mean, these best practices we talk about, a lot of what you saw earlier, swim, really is in this report, right? And so I don't think that the best practices are necessarily intrinsic or exclusive. It's something that can be broadly practiced, I think anywhere that road salt's being used. So thanks for having me.
Kevin?
You just wanted us to introduce ourselves, Phil.
That's the way Phil does it.
So, most of you know me in this room. I'm Kevin Hajos. I'm the Superintendent of Public Works for Warren County. I grew up not in Warren County. I grew up in Saratoga County, but most of my family spent a lot of time in the Adirondack Park when we were young. This was our escape to come up to vacation. It was always up here. I was fortunate enough to be picked by Governor Hochul to be on the task force. I'm glad she picked myself and Tracy Eldridge because we are kind of the boots on the ground. We're the operations. We're the ones who go through this day in and day out on placing salt on the roads and keeping the roads safe for the public. So I was fortunate enough to be put on this. I've been in Warren County now for 15 years. I've been the Superintendent of Public Works. Now I'm going into my 6th year. And I'm looking forward to, I think I heard Sean say it, a collaboration between the DEC, DOT, and municipalities on reducing salt in the Adirondack Park. Rob and I just had a meeting down at DOT recently, and we discussed some of the programs or the pilot studies that DOT was doing. They're doing the same thing we're doing. We're all trying to achieve the same goal as reducing salt in the Adirondack Park, and I think based on a balance, I think we can get there. So, thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. AJ?
Hi, everybody. So I'm AJ Smith. I'm Assistant Division Director for the DEC's Division of Water. My involvement in the task force was really as that representation from the agency and to also sort of bring the support that the agency could provide relative to water quality contamination, and sort of that statewide perspective, and obviously that the support that the agency could bring alongside DOT. So the work that I've done previously, it actually was really helpful in engaging in the task force, and I was really excited about the opportunity to actually be able to be part of the task force because just a few years back we had been analyzing water quality data from across the state. As Sean had mentioned, we have very robust water quality monitoring programs that Division of Water specifically maintains, and those programs have been going on since the early 60s. And we had taken a look at water quality data across the state using those robust data sets from that historical period of time up until present, and had identified that some of the big changes that we were seeing in general water quality across the state were really related to chloride and potentially road salt contamination, and trends in increases in chloride and sodium over time. And that was pretty alarming to us, and so that kind of sparked a lot of additional work within Division of Water from like an applied research perspective. And so the opportunity to then engage and understand best management practices and snow and ice removal technologies that are in place and what municipalities are doing was really helpful for us to then be able to bring that back to the work that we do within the division to think about, how the Division of Water and the agency can help make a difference going forward statewide. So again, we kind of looked at the Adirondack piece as sort of a proving ground and an opportunity to understand a broader issue that also could be applied in other areas.
Thank you, AJ. And last, but not least, Jerry. Good morning, Jerry.
Good morning. I'm Jerry Delaney. I'm Executive Director of the Adirondack Park Local Government Review Board. I followed a giant in the Adirondacks, Fred Monroe, who had this position, and I feel he was a great mentor. I hope I learned a little something from him. Unlike everybody else up here, I don't think I really have a lot of specialized skills on this task force. You can blame Billy Jones, and he made sure he wasn't anywhere near here for you to give any blame to him. He put me on the task force. I'm a town councilman for 16 years in the town of Saranac up north. I look at this in a lot of different ways, but what really piqued my interest was when I had a single mother with 3 small children call me up and say, "There's salt in my well, what do I do about it?" And it's hard to tell somebody who's struggling that there's nothing you can do about it. You can fight with the state of New York, you can spend a lot of money, but the salt's still gonna be there. And we have a couple of areas in my town. One of them is between two water districts, long-term state DOT area for sand and salt that's really affected that aquifer up there. And those people struggle with very, very high salt values in their water. And so pretty much, I guess it was my activism around trying to work with Billy on this that got me here. And I will say, sitting up here, that every one of the task force members were very passionate about what they were doing, but unlike some passionate people, they were always willing to open their ears, listen, learn, discuss. And as much as it pains me to give DEC a lot of credit, AJ here carried this report in the end. He took a lot of criticism at times, and it was a struggle. I know it was a struggle for him, and you can see what he produced in the end.
I thought it was a lot of fun.
And for disclosure, we did ask, and I think we'll call our 4.5 panel member, Rob Fitch, and he will be available, he told me, to answer any questions. We did not want to exclude DOT from the panel. Our hope was to have possibly Dr. Kelting or Dr. Chris Stefanuk on the scientific side, but they were unavailable. So with that, I'll start off. I guess the one question that I would throw out first, and again, if there's anybody in the audience that would like to add, we will field those, but we talked about some collaborations. The Executive Deputy Commissioner spoke about that, and just wondering what your thoughts are and what collaborations are needed to achieve success, and what that success might be, if there was anybody interested in taking that. So what collaborations are needed, taking a look at these recommendations from the report?
Pilot studies. So one of the things that was talked about in the report were pilot studies. I understand, that DOT has a couple of pilot studies, and as Rob said, maybe they're going to do a couple more. But I think, there's a lot of municipalities that could do some of these pilot studies as well. Town of Hague, Warren County, Washington County, any of the towns along that side of the lake, town of Peru, who is here, allowing us to do some of those pilot studies as well as part of this. And we would share the information with the state, with DEC, with DOT, but I think, allowing some of the other municipalities and groups to do some of those pilot studies and not just the state, I think would go a long way.
I would say, and it's probably a little bit of a reach, but I really think it's important to understand that this shouldn't be the end, this should be the beginning. And I'll go back to salt and aquifers. We're not going to stop the salt that's been laid down in the last 40 years from going down, that's in the ground. It's going to our aquifers. So we shouldn't be happy with reduced salt. Reduced salt should be a short-term solution to a long-term problem. We should be trying to use our intelligence to find a way to replace salt that isn't as dangerous to our aquifers as salt is.
Amen to that. Phill.
Just real briefly, I think, when you think about the needs, particularly with the pilots, so we have measuring and monitoring that's needed. We have practitioners that are needed, and I think we have funding that's needed. And I think just like the industry itself and just like this issue itself, it can be very fragmented if we're not careful, I think. And so, how do we pool all this together so that we're You know, it's not, you know, DOT's budget and DEC's water quality and Warren County's operation. It's like, you know, we could very easily work in silos on this, I think, if we're not careful. So I think, I wanted to say something too, by the way, while I have it, like, this process was very interesting to me. Like, I'm not real patient when it comes to the pace of how some of these things work, but this guy here, we have a very strong foundation of knowledge, right, that was developed from this. And some people, I've heard some criticism, people say, oh, so what, like, we already kind of knew this was a problem, right? But to the extent of the problem and what the root causes are, and then this guy actually, if you try to edit everybody's passion and everybody's text and try to put it in one format, is no easy task. So this guy is the one that actually pulled it all together, you know, sort of voluntarily in some ways. I don't know how much you were voluntold to do this, but you took it on. But I think even that, like, so that foundation of knowledge, I think, is sort of the foundation of collaboration on this, right? And so I think just like how the chairs were set up, that's what we need.
And I think,
Go ahead, AJ.
so, I mean, I really appreciate the flattering remarks. It was definitely a team effort, and couldn't have done it without everybody. And I think, you know, to that point, you know, it was really impressive. I've been on a lot of these kinds of things, you know, done really big kind of corralling events to try and come out with a product. And sometimes it gets pretty heated, but I really felt like everybody brought a really good balanced perspective and was willing to listen to what everybody else had to say. And I think that made the process a lot better. And I think the product is a result of that, you know, that it's a really good product. And I think, you know, we have heard, you know, oh, right, obvious, right, I think was one of the words I read in a news article, because of course I had to read the news on the report, you know, to see how it was being received. But I think what that kind of comment lacks is acknowledgement that now you have a roadmap, right, for how to implement these practices, right? You have a roadmap, a gauge that you can then take, each of the agencies can take, or anybody, a municipality can say, okay, if I want to reduce road salt, here are the things that I could probably focus on to help me get there, right? It's in one location and identifies also for us as an agency, like DEC, a list of priorities that then we should work to engage on. And I think that speaks to you know, what you were saying before about you hope it's not the end. And I think it's definitely not, you know, from our perspective. I think because now we have the map in front of us, we have the laundry list of potential, you know, work, we can start to engage and we can start to do more. And you know, I always look for the low-hanging fruit right out of the gate. You know, what can we do, right, initially? You know, so for us, that's things like, okay, maybe we make some, turn the knobs on our monitoring programs to maybe focus a little bit more on road cell contamination in the Adirondacks, where it may be a very prevalent problem. You know, maybe it's think about our funding opportunities and the grants that we provide to do more than just maybe salt storage, right? Some of the things that Sean was talking about earlier, you know, hitting on some of those points, right? I think that those are all really positive things, but they only occur after having gone through this exercise, right? And sometimes noting the obvious. And I think that's okay. And there's a lot in here that was not obvious too. So
The one point I would add, and then I think we got a question out in the audience, was when DOT set up the pilot on Route 9N, I think also on Route 86, that I would like collaborations. They actually set up a local technical group that had representatives from the local government. On the Route 9N, it was the prior Mayor Blaze. They had other local elected officials. They also had some businesses involved. And I think that would be something to carry on. I'd like to see those working groups and technical groups carried on with each of the pilots as well. I think we'll go to the audience, and then I think we've got one or some questions
David
online.
Miller, Clean Water Program Coordinator for the Adirondack Council. First of all, I just want to commend the task force for its work, for its incredible pace at putting it together. This is not an easy task, and moving forward with this program and report and all the great recommendations. One concern we have is that while it might be a map, it's yet to be a road map, AJ. It's a listing of things, and we need to figure out how to get from point A to point B to point C. And Sean mentioned prioritization and further review and evaluation. Do you have a plan, or the agency has a plan to do that prioritization, create reduction targets, create an action plan, create an implementation timeline, to create a continued advisory group to oversee the report's implementation? Those things I didn't see really come forward in the report, or a sense of urgency for those things, and that's more of the how to make what you recommend a reality. So I'd love to hear comments about the need for that to make this task force a living document to move forward, as Jerry talked about.
So I think that's been a sentiment I think that we've heard, at least as an agency representative, all along, right? I think it's probably fair to say that these guys have been, very much advocates of making sure that, the report doesn't just get issued and then sit on the shelf. And so hearing that, all along, we've been trying to think about what are some of the next steps that we could be doing. Do we have a specific plan yet? No, we don't have a specific written plan of action. But because we've been so engaged, we've already identified, a handful of things that we think would be very beneficial. Division of Water has its, and Sean mentioned this before, Division of Water has a very robust, and DEC has a very robust water quality improvement projects funding program that right now has been focused on salt storage. One of the recommendations on funding is to think about other categories of improvement type projects related to salt, potentially even, working with DOT on other new ideas related to, I don't know if infrastructure is the right word for it, but like, the equipment type stuff, right?
So you could add equipment to the road salt storage category.
Potentially. Right, potentially that's the kind of thing that we're trying to talk about. And we've already had those conversations. One of the other things on the funding side is thinking about developing and working with communities on developing road salt reduction plans, right? So that a community itself has a plan for how it will address road salt reduction, right? And what best management practices will it take from the, this is outside of like the DOT use of the recommendations, but on the local level, developing those kinds of planning documents that say, okay, we're going to take into consideration everything that you talked about in the report, and these are the things that we can do maybe without any funding. Maybe it's related to education and training, the kinds of conversations everyone's probably having this week, right, at the conference. So I think that's like some early low-hanging fruit for us, and something that I think could really start to get us off the ground. Plus, the pilot studies, being able to engage and provide an advisory role in any of the pilot studies that are ongoing. I think that's another place where we're hoping to be able to start early on engaging, because I think we need to get some data, additional data and information through those pilots to really know exactly which ones could be prioritized, right? And I think that's why you don't see necessarily prioritization right now, because there's still more data and information that needs to be collected through the pilots. All right, I'll stop, sorry.
Yeah, Jerry.
This might be my chance to beat up on the agency, so. We were really specific, the whole task force. We all had personal experiences, professional experiences that led us to our comments. And I would say we were very specific about funding. We were very specific about where we thought funding could be managed without really increasing a lot of workload on the agencies, requiring new people. Local government's probably the people that should be the most disturbed with the end of this report, because a lot of those things didn't come out. But in the defense of the agencies, if we actually put all that minutia in the report, it could just be a hammer that could be used on them when they didn't when it wasn't the right time for them to do it. So you can be sure that the minutia has been heard loud and clear by these agencies. And probably some of the reason the report was slow to come out is as we argued about how much of that went in, how much of it didn't go in. So funding was a big piece, and I myself was a big proponent that we make sure our local roads are kept up and paved to a standard that the water runs off in the wintertime, that something like that was in the report, so that you don't have standing water that's going to freeze after the sun goes down and just gets cold enough to freeze up, that it has time to shed off the pavement in the daytime. And that's a big problem with local roads, is having those crowns and the ability for that water to shed.
And to echo that, I think that's something Tracy Eldridge he advocated for a lot, to try to make sure that we could get paving projects. Can they be considered infrastructure? Can they be considered under these type of funding plans? I think I'd like to go online if we could, if that's all right with everyone.
Yeah, this question is speaking to salt contamination. Is post-application removal an option? For example, snowbank removal in sensitive areas or around wells?
If you wanted to spend enough money, I mean, that's the bottom line. If you wanted to spend enough money, we all know that when we put salt and sand down and it keeps snowing and you have to go over it, you push the salt and the sand into the snowbank, and it would be a very costly option. I don't see where that would be viable at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, it's, you know, in our business, there is such a thing as chloride-free. There are chloride-free alternatives to materials. There are chloride-free methodologies. I think to support Jerry's point, though, you know, we do it at the, call it the sales level, right? So there are a few clients out there, if you will, and we'd call it constituents in the public model, but that will pay for it. And some have to because they have contaminated, actually, they've contaminated town wells, right? You're going to hear about one, I think, later on today that we work with. And, but it's a different cost model, period. And so that's where the question keeps coming up then, how important of an issue is this really? So you have to, you know, culturally you have to put your commitment to this, and then you actually have to put your money where your mouth is on this too, right? So it does require money.
We'll let Kevin, do you want to add to that?
I'm good. No.
Okay. Okay.
Me? All right, thank you. I want to thank the task force for its work, for sure. And I know it took a long time, and I can imagine how, you know, complicated it was. But we do have a crisis, and I'm not Chicken Little. I'm not here to say the sky is falling. But when Jerry brings up the contamination of drinking water wells, which is widespread, that's not an isolated example. And we know the cause and effect, we know the sources, right? So the way we've approached road salt at Lake George, it's a no regrets action. And yes, we have studies, we have data that shows road salt's going up at Lake George. We have spiking levels in our tributaries that are at times toxic. And we took the bull by the horns and we moved forward because we had to. There wasn't time to study it. We had to solve it. And so I just hope that in that spirit, and knowing, as stated, this is considered the acid rain of our time, but the big difference is, you know what? We can solve it locally. That's the power of what we've tried to do and demonstrate at Lake George, is it takes a team, it takes a village, it takes a lake, whatever you want to say. So I guess my point in all of this is understanding it is a crisis that we face. It's real. This is no joke. The science couldn't be clearer. This is a problem that's getting worse. We've got to get our ducks in order. We've got to have a process. We've got to have a roadmap. But we got to put our foot on the accelerator We don't have time to talk about thinking, we might do this, we have ideas to do that. We need to leverage those places that have already demonstrated progress and the champions, the heroes, as I think Phill called them, and learn from them and create these multiple nodes of progress to accelerate this process, because it has to be done. We don't have time to lose. That single mother with 3 kids, she can't wait. So a response is appreciated, but it's more of a statement than a question. Thank you.
I'm James Emery. I'm going to be speaking in a little bit, but I'm from New Hampshire. My father actually was a regional director of transportation for both Watertown, New York, and Long Island and New York City. So I come from a DOT background, but I'm a hydrogeologist and have lived in New Hampshire for the last 45 years. And salt has become our #1 groundwater contaminant. You'll see in some of the slides I'm going to present on the impacts that salt has had. But one of the things I have a question directly for this group is that in New Hampshire, we struggle with a disconnect between the DOT and the DES. In our world, it's not the DEC, but it's the Department of Environmental Services. And although there are, the DES has the mandate to protect water quality and groundwater quality and so forth, and DOT has the mandate to maintain safety, one would understand or think that there would be a better relationship between the two organizations to promote the reduction of salt use. So what my question is here, and I very much appreciate the task force and this report that's been prepared, because that does show cooperation between the two entities. But is there a long-term plan for the DOT of New York and the DEC to actually marry together with a direct mandate to determine how they're going to reduce salt in the next 10 years? And so that would be something that I would love to hear back, and maybe that's in play, or maybe that's something that's being discussed, but that's my question.
We'll turn to AJ.
Yeah, I guess so. All right. So just real quick, too, because I think it was Eric.
It was.
Yeah, we didn't get to respond. I think, from an agency perspective, we understand exactly what you're saying, and I think the work that we've done internally in review of data, and I think the SALT Task Force report was a really helpful exercise for us to review and analyze data, along with DOH. Right? DOH isn't here today, but DOH played a very important role, especially when it came to looking at the existing data and information relative to drinking water sources, right? And I think that what we've seen is that it is an extremely important issue of the day, and one that is extremely widespread. And we got to start doing stuff that that will move the needle now, as opposed to at some date in the future. Sort of like what we're seeing with other emerging contaminants, PFAS, right? PFOA, PFOS. I look at those two things as some of the biggest issues, chlorides, road salt, and other emerging contaminants like PFAS as being some of the biggest drivers of the work that we're doing right now. So, I hear you, and I think we're always willing to step in and work with local communities to do whatever we can. And I think that was part of what we learned too from this task force was what are some of the opportunities that we can engage in. So I guess that's sort of, well, there wasn't too much of a question, maybe a little bit of a response for you. And happy to talk more about it. And then in terms of, is there a collaboration? I mean, I think that we had collaboration in advance of the task force, and we work with DOT on a lot of other water quality issues outside of just salt. DOT has a lot of different facilities, right? We work with them on their facilities. We work with DOT on road salt. We had been working with DOT on some of their earlier pilots, the ones that I think Rob had mentioned during his remarks. We had also been working with DOT on response to other road salt contamination issues, along with DOH. And so I think that we, coming out of the task force, will be looking to, make sure that those collaborations are only strengthened to be able to carry forth what's being recommended in the report.
And I'd like to say that one of the things the task force was really pushing for was not to be turned out to pasture, that there are advisory groups, especially with DEC, like FPAC, that they bring stakeholders in, and the task force really wanted to be able to continue to engage DOT and DEC and the Department of Health moving forward, just to try to be the stakeholders that kept those issues to the forefront.
Just real quick, in New Hampshire, it's why I got involved as a contractor, right? So at one time I was overseeing the largest operation, right? And what happened in New Hampshire was it got flipped to showing that the private side of the industry was actually the bigger sort of user and contaminator, if you will. But I think what it taught me was we talk a lot about salt reduction, right? Reduce the use, and I think what we've found is promoting responsible use ends up becoming reduction over time, right? So we have a lot of inconsistency in the industry. DOT, not pointing fingers here, but DOT, like any other operation, the more operations you have fragmented throughout the state, the more inconsistency you're gonna find. We got some folks in Barnes that are putting it down at 120 pounds a lane mile. We got others that are putting it down at 500 and go up, right? And so I think if we can find that, so I think DEC's role in this, or DES is sort of what their role was with their DOT back in the time. DEC's role is sounding the alarm. So it's kind of, I think about snow just like firefighting, right? You're the alarm. DOT's responsibility in their case is to respond to the alarm, right? And so I think the alarm in this case is we've got a lot of inconsistent use. If we could just drill down on that, we'd be solving a lot of this problem.
And I think the point you just made, Phil, is spot on. So like if we carry it back to the question about funding before, I think probably the first thing we got to think about funding is education, outreach, and training, right? Because I think, oh geez, sorry. The biggest thing that I learned coming out of the report and the talking with all the folks on the task force was that there's a lot of stuff that snow and ice removal professionals are doing right now, and then there's a bunch of other things that could be done too. Some things that maybe don't require a huge amount of funding, but what they require is education and training. And so providing that, that's because, and it kind of goes back to the question from online, if you can hit it at its source, right, and prevent the not necessarily prevent the application, but reduce it and do it in a wise way, just like any other contaminant, right? We reduce what's on the landscape then, but we're still effective and can maintain DOT and other, municipal levels of service for public safety. I think it's doable.
Online?
I'm kind of on the same line as this conversation. Looking at the bigger picture, will recommended best management practices be required statewide eventually, not just in the Adirondacks?
I mean, they're certainly recommended. I think the good news, back to David's question, is, there's categories of pilots that have been recommended. So the best management practices, the standards being deployed here have all been laid out in that report. The good news is then there's these different categories of pilots that have been recommended. So I think that's a bit of what's being assessed. But one of the things that I am hearing confidently is you're going to continue the ones that already exist. So some of that's through our work here, some of that's through DOT's work, and that's category number one. So I think it's just a matter of, Rob and I both agreed on this earlier, continuous improvement, right? So like, how do you continuously improve what's already ongoing? So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. And, what's really the number one pilot category, it's how do we properly fund it? How do we properly scale it, I think is the case. So I think in some cases, the pilot needs to be, how do you get it beyond the pilot, right, to scale? Because we've been talking about some of this long enough, right? And we've been testing this long enough. So I think that's a big opportunity.
They're shooting at us already. As a task force member, the one thing I was advocating on was requirements as far as training. And I know that the state has requirements on training, the Snow University, I think the DOT calls it. I felt, we should be trying to get that training to be brought down. I think that's another way on the municipal levels, that requirements of training, not trying to make it more regulatory, but trying to place the burden on helping these folks, as said, that are going out there at 3 a.m, give them the best opportunity to do the best job that they can. I think, is there any more? One more online, or in the audience, I think. Is there more online?
If I missed this, forgive me, but is there a rough number on the percentage of New York State roads that are brined as opposed to the old way?
I wouldn't have that number. I wouldn't have that number.
Would you wing it? I don't blame you.
Because I'm the one that got shot here. Feel pretty good.
You look good.
There is a question in the back.
There are many lakes beyond the Adirondack Park that have chloride loads that are 3, 4, 5 times the load of Lake George. Is there any prioritization of rolling out pilots based upon chloride loads, and when can lakes beyond the Adirondack Park experience some mitigation measures?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and I'm really glad that you brought it up, because one of the things that that I think that we saw, from the state agency, we look at things, as a statewide perspective. We have data sets that are statewide in nature, and when we look at those, there are significant areas of the state, right, where the chloride load is substantially greater. And I think that's part of the reason why we say the information that we got out of the task force in this report is really helpful from a statewide perspective, because it gives us some recommendations of things, pilots or what have you, to be able to think about in some of those other areas. Right now, we've been focused on the Adirondacks, but I think that at some point we probably need to be looking at, at some of those other, heavier concentration, higher loaded areas.
Would it be possible for the DOT to consider pilots beyond the borders of the Adirondack Park?
Yeah, so that we'll have to ask DOT. I can't speak for them on pilots.
As far as establishing pilots, our focus is on the Adirondack Park. But as I mentioned during the remarks, everything we learned, every best practice that's validated, we're rolling out statewide. There's no reason to keep these things in the Adirondack Park. As far as our training, our equipment, those things, they're rolled out statewide. So we're not focusing just on the park there.
But when you roll out statewide, you're not going to do the entire state all at once. Are you prioritizing based upon chloride loads?
Well, actually, we do roll it out statewide. As far as a training standpoint, every region in the state will receive training. Not every person within those regions, but we spread that training out to those regions, and then gradually within those regions it broadens. But there is no prioritized list of water bodies where we specifically focus training. For instance, this location here, we need to make sure we have that information there. At this point, we don't. But there is a tool that we've been working with through Clear Roads, which is a national organization of snow and ice practitioners. I think there's 38 states combined. Right now, there's a project that we initiated with them. There's been some draft information published from them already that uses GIS information to establish sensitivity to salt usage. So it factors things such as wetlands, well locations, public drinking water sources, things of those natures. There's a huge list of things that is looked at. And ultimately, once that tool is finalized, it will be able to be used for purposes that you mentioned, as far as identifying sensitivity at specific locations, where locations that may have more limited resources, let's say you have a town that can get, maybe one new truck. They can't afford to outfit all of their trucks with this telemetry, but if they have one truck that they can do, maybe that's where they focus that truck at that location. So that certainly is in our mindset.
Following up on that, we heard this morning success stories, and I want to get to Eric's point on this too, and the urgency that some towns or counties took to move forward, and 40%, 50% reduction in Washington County. Are you envisioning at DOT the ability through the pilots to achieve similar reduction targets over the next several years based on the pilots' work? I mean, the techniques and best management practices through Phil's work and others seem to be there. Are they transferable and scalable park-wide to the DOT? So in 3 years, we'd say DOT's reduced its loads by 50%, or more towns have signed up to do that too through training.
I kind of think this is where my voice came in. We all know that around this Lake George region, there's an immense amount of finances that have been put into these towns that have had these success stories. And that's great, but that's also the problem. The people that finance Lake George were intent on getting their waterway in better health, and they have done that through invasive species, through salt, and the next threat to this lake, I'm sure they're going to step right up and they're going to do it again. As you move around into communities, it comes down to town boards to convince them that this money is actually going to save them money over time. It's one town at a time. Just because Peru did it doesn't mean every town in Clinton County wants to do it. I'm not saying they won't, but start counting 100 communities inside the park and go pull up every one of their budgets and look at those decisions those people are making and look at the tax burdens that are falling onto these people. It becomes a dollar and cents thing, and there has to be part of the education we talk about up here is the education of not just the practitioners on the road, but it's the town boards, the decision makers, the people that drive the roads so that they understand why their taxes are going up. It's a much bigger thing when you start raising taxes, and we'd all love the state to pony up the money to do it, but we'd be paying them the taxes instead of locally.
My main focus was DOT, 71% versus 29% of the salt going down on the roads in the park. So can they use what towns are learning and make it scalable so they can have serious reduction targets?
I was asked to come up here and respond so that the folks online can see. The first part of that question, is it scalable? Yeah, we believe it's scalable. The best practices that we're talking about are something that could be implemented in most every location. As far as the reductions, I think it's important to keep in mind your starting point. We believe that through optimization and better management, any system can improve. But to identify a location or a specific number of 50%, 40%, I'm not confident you can do that because I'm confident that our starting location is pretty good. So that's the other aspect to keep in mind.
Okay, I am going to throw out the last. Go ahead.
Just one more online question. Is the patent for calcium sodium acetate, I think they might mean magnesium, so calcium magnesium acetate, inhibiting the affordability of its application?
So CMA they're calling, right? So what's the question?
Is the patent on CMA inhibiting the affordability of its application? CMA is one of the most expensive.
I don't believe so. Just, we use it as contractors. We're actually getting away from it though as well. Acetate's got a little bit of the issue as well and performance issue, but no, I think it's just the actual material itself, the mining process, the availability process, yeah. I don't think it's the patent, because there's other CMA products out there. Yeah.
Okay, I want to,
Can I just make
sure.
Hello. Yeah. Just a quick response to Jerry's point, because I think it's a bit misleading, and I understand the point made, Jerry, that there's significant resources in Lake George to help underwrite and facilitate what's happening. But I would only say that given the experience of Washington County, Warren County, Peru, the whole point of what we've done is to be the pebble in the pond, is to demonstrate what is possible, guided by the science, so that when it comes to funding, we're not doing it all, by the way, as an organization or as a collaboration with municipalities. But we do now have municipalities, because they're saving money as a result of this investment. They're sending us funding to support the Lake George Road Salt Reduction Initiative. So it works. You got to start somewhere. There isn't a startup cost. Phill refers to this repeatedly. But the return on that investment is enormous. So we do need the public funding to follow suit and do the same for those places that are struggling and don't have the resources we may have at Lake George. But we're not creating a gated community at Lake George. We're creating an example that others can follow. So thank you.
So with that, I will throw out one last question to our panelists. I want to thank them all. If we can give them a round. And then one last question for them. Jerry sort of touched on this, but what do you think is the greatest change in behavior that is needed, and by whom? So I'll start. Kevin.
I'll take educating the public. Stop going out and getting your Starbucks coffee in a snowstorm. You make your coffee at home. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, as I said, I grew up in Saratoga County. I grew up on a farm. We were driving on snow-covered roads, but the reality today is that people feel they need to drive on bare roads. That's why we're having to put down salt that we do. We have reduced it in Warren County. We'll continue to reduce it. I think there's a balance between public safety and protecting the environment. I think we can reach that balance. But again, it's just educating the public. You don't need to be going out during a snowstorm to get your Starbucks coffee, plain and simple.
Jerry?
I've got to agree with Kevin for part of it. Since 1980, we've watched the expectations of what our roads look like and how fast they look like that change. And, highway departments on the local level are pretty much all elected, so they have to serve their taxpayers. So getting the public to understand that they're not always going to be bare is really important. And then it is the overall education part of the piece, right across the board, from the public to your town boards to your highway crews. This is not a small nut you're trying to crack open. It's a big nut.
AJ?
Yeah, I mean, what's not to agree with on both of those, So I think that it's a whole scale behavioral change, education, outreach that needs to happen. And I think that, when we are able to engage in that kind of campaign, then, it makes all of the practitioners' lives a whole lot easier because that expectation is different.
Slipping on slippery conditions should not be allowed to be litigated.
Very good. Thank you all. And again, thank panels. Appreciate it. Thank for your work on the task force, and thank the representatives of the commissioners.
I just want to add one more thing, if I could. For the people, and Phill said this earlier, I think he stole it from me when I did my presentation in Cornell. How many plow drivers do we have in here? Give these guys a round of applause, because these are the heroes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Job
Thanks,
well
everyone.
done.